The sea stretched endlessly before them, a vast expanse of inky black water reflecting the ominous clouds swirling above. Cole, a seasoned sailor with weathered hands and a piercing gaze, stood at the helm of the Maelstrom, his heart heavy with a foreboding that had settled over the crew since they'd entered the Devil's Triangle. His crewmates, Dante, an ex-pirate with a cunning mind and a dark past, Corwin, a quiet, brooding navigator with a tragic history, and Declan, the ship's youngest but sharpest lookout, shared his unspoken fear. The air was thick with tension as the sea seemed unnaturally still, the ship cutting through the water without resistance. The legend of the Ghost Fleet had haunted sailors for generations, but now they were sailing directly into the heart of it. The Maelstrom had been commissioned for a dangerous mission, to map the uncharted waters of the Devil's Triangle. No one had volunteered willingly, but the promise of fortune and fame had outweighed the whispers of doom. As the ship drifted deeper into the heart of the triangle, strange phenomena began to occur. Declan swore he saw shadows moving just beneath the surface of the water, while Dante muttered about a faint whisper carried on the wind. Even the ever-silent Corwin tightened his grip on the charts, his eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting something to emerge from the mist. On the fourth night, the mist thickened, curling around the ship like a living entity. The compass spun wildly, and the stars above began to vanish one by one. "We've lost our heading," Corwin muttered, his voice barely audible over the eerie silence. Cole's instincts screamed at him to turn back, but he knew that there was no escape now. They were being watched, pulled deeper into the cursed waters. A chilling wind swept across the deck, carrying with it the unmistakable sound of distant ghostly wails. That night, Cole awoke with a start, the ship creaking and groaning under a weight that should not have been there. He stumbled onto the deck, eyes wide as he saw them, spectral ships, their tattered sails glowing faintly in the dark. They drifted silently, surrounding the Maelstrom in a ghostly armada. Cole's heart pounded in his chest as the Ghost Fleet closed in, and he knew, with a sickening certainty, that the legends were true. The cursed sailors of the Devil's Triangle had come for them. As dawn broke, a fog thicker than any Cole had ever seen clung to the ship. The ghostly fleet had vanished, but the crew was left in a state of shock. "We're not alone out here," Dante muttered, his eyes dark with fear. Corwin stared into the distance, unblinking, while Declan remained perched in the crow's nest, scanning the horizon for any sign of the phantom ships. But Cole knew it wasn't over. The Ghost Fleet had marked them, and it was only a matter of time before they returned to claim their prize. As the sun failed to break through the thick blanket of fog the next morning, the Maelstrom drifted aimlessly in the heart of the Devil's Triangle. The crew moved with unease, their nerves frayed from the encounter the night before. Cole stood at the bow, watching the mist swirl like the breath of some unseen beast. Dante paced the deck, muttering under his breath about curses and ghosts, his once steady hands trembling. Corwin remained locked in concentration, his eyes glued to the charts that no longer seemed to make sense. Declan, however, seemed oddly calm, his gaze fixed on the horizon as though he were searching for something only he could see. By midday, the strange occurrences intensified. Objects moved on their own, ropes untied themselves, and the ship's lanterns flickered even though there was no wind. Cole tried to keep the crew focused, but fear had already taken root. "It's the Ghost Fleet," Dante said, gripping the hilt of his blade as if it could ward off the spirits. "They're playing with us, waiting for the right moment to strike." Corwin said nothing, his face pale as he studied the compass, which spun endlessly, refusing to point in any direction. Cole knew they were no longer in control. The Maelstrom was at the mercy of the phantom ships, and their fates were tied to the cursed waters they sailed. That evening the Ghost Fleet returned. The spectral ships emerged silently from the mist, their decayed forms casting an eerie glow on the dark waters. This time they did not merely pass by. The ghostly vessels surrounded the Maelstrom, their pale, skeletal crews staring across the divide. A deathly silence fell over the sea, and for a long moment it felt as though time itself had stopped. "They want something from us," Corwin whispered, his voice barely audible. Declan's eyes widened as he pointed to the nearest ship. "Look," he said, "they're trying to communicate." The crew watched in horror as ghostly figures raised their arms, beckoning them closer. A booming voice echoed through the mist, reverberating across the deck of the Maelstrom. "Join us, or pay the price." The crew was paralyzed, the weight of the decision crushing them. Cole's mind raced. He had heard the stories. The only way to escape the Ghost Fleet was to offer a sacrifice. But who? Dante's eyes darted between his crewmates, fear twisting his features, while Corwin stood frozen, his normally calm demeanor shattered. Declan stared into the mist, as if searching for answers from the spectral fleet. The silence that followed the voice was suffocating, the air thick with the weight of their impossible choice. Cole took a deep breath, the reality of their situation sinking in. They were trapped, surrounded by an army of the damned, and there was no escape. The Ghost Fleet had not come for mercy. They had come for blood. "We have to make a decision," Cole muttered, his voice trembling. But no one spoke, the unspoken question hanging over them like a curse. Who would be the one to pay the ultimate price? The crew exchanged glances, the growing dread tightening its grip. As the Ghost Fleet pressed closer, the cold truth settled over them. Someone would have to be sacrificed, or they would all be lost to the cursed waters forever. The Maelstrom groaned beneath the weight of the decision that hung in the air. Cole's mind raced, his gaze darting between his crewmates and the ghostly fleet closing in around them. The voice of the cursed sailors echoed in his mind. "Join us, or pay the price." The ship creaked as if protesting the sinister ultimatum. Cole's heart pounded in his chest, knowing the choice would decide their fates. Dante's knuckles were white as he gripped his blade, sweat beading on his brow. Corwin stood frozen, his normally steady gaze clouded with dread, while Declan, silent and pale, stared at the ghostly figures beckoning from the fog. "We can't outrun them," Dante hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. "They'll hunt us until we're part of their cursed fleet." His eyes flicked to the others, desperation written across his face. Corwin's lips tightened and he shook his head slowly. "We have no other choice. If we don't make the sacrifice, we're all dead, or worse." His words sent a cold shiver through the crew. Cole's hands trembled as he weighed the unbearable decision before him. Could he truly condemn one of his own to save the rest? The ghostly fleet pressed closer, the ethereal glow from their rotting hulls casting an eerie light across the Maelstrom. Time was running out. "I'll do it." The voice was soft but resolute. Declan stepped forward, his young face drawn but determined. "I'll be the sacrifice." Cole's heart sank as the words hit him like a wave. "No," he said, shaking his head. "We'll find another way. We always do." But the look in Declan's eyes told him there would be no other way this time. The Ghost Fleet's presence was suffocating, and the cursed waters had already claimed them in spirit, if not in body. Declan's sacrifice was the only chance they had of escaping the Triangle alive. Dante cursed under his breath but said nothing. Corwin stared at the deck, unable to meet Declan's gaze. The Ghost Fleet loomed ominously, its decaying ships almost close enough to touch. The cold, unnatural light from the spectral vessels flickered as the ghostly crew watched, waiting for the decision. With a heavy heart, Cole nodded, his throat tight. "We have no choice," he whispered. Declan walked to the edge of the deck, his steps slow but steady. The sea seemed to hold its breath as he neared the edge. The ghostly wails of the damned sailors grew louder, their voices filled with hunger. The crew stood frozen as Declan climbed onto the railing, his final glance back filled with a sorrowful resolve. "Goodbye," he said softly, before diving into the misty abyss. As Declan disappeared beneath the waves, the fog closed in, and for a moment there was only silence. Then the ghost fleet began to retreat, their rotting sails billowing in an unseen wind. The Maelstrom lurched forward, the curse momentarily lifted as they sailed away from the haunted waters. But the cost weighed heavily on them all. Cole stared into the distance, his hands gripping the helm, knowing they had only escaped by sacrificing the soul of an innocent. The ghost fleet had claimed its price, but the true toll on the crew would linger long after the cursed waters had faded from view. The Maelstrom sailed in silence, the fog still thick around them, but the oppressive presence of the ghost fleet had lifted. Cole stood at the helm, his hands gripping the wheel, knuckles white from the tension. Dante paced across the deck, his mind clearly racing as he muttered curses under his breath. Corwin was quiet, his eyes scanning the horizon, but there was no sense of relief in his gaze. They had escaped, but the shadow of Declan's sacrifice hung over the crew like a death sentence. The sea remained eerily calm, and the oppressive quiet was almost worse than the ghostly wails that had filled the air before. "It should have been me," Dante finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was raw, edged with guilt and regret. Cole turned to look at him but found no words. They had all felt the weight of the choice, but no one had moved when Declan stepped forward. "He was just a kid," Dante continued, his eyes dark with anger. Corwin kept his gaze forward, saying nothing, but his clenched fists told Cole all he needed to know. None of them had been brave enough to stop Declan, and now they would carry that shame forever. The ship creaked underfoot, a quiet reminder of the journey that wasn't over. As the hours passed, the mist began to clear, and the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. The crew blinked against the sudden light, but the warmth felt hollow. The haunted waters of the Devil's Triangle were behind them now, but they knew that something had followed them, an invisible mark of the choice they had made. Cole stared at the horizon, knowing that they would never return to normal. The sea had claimed a part of them, a piece that could never be reclaimed. The ghost fleet was gone, but their souls had been tainted by its presence. That night, Cole stood alone at the bow, staring out at the calm sea. He could still hear the ghostly whispers, faint but unmistakable, carried on the wind. He knew they would never truly be free. The price of their survival was far greater than they had ever imagined. "We're cursed," he muttered to himself, his breath misting in the cool night air. The ship felt hollow, as if the life had been drained from it the moment Declan disappeared into the mist. Even the stars seemed dimmer, as though the universe itself had turned its back on them. There was no escape from what they had done. As the Maelstrom sailed into the unknown, the crew remained quiet, each lost in their thoughts. The sea stretched endlessly before them, calm and vast, but the feeling of dread still clung to the ship like a shroud. They had survived the Devil's Triangle, but the curse of the ghost fleet was far from over. The choice they had made would follow them, haunting their every step. And somewhere, deep beneath the dark waters, Declan's spirit was bound to the fleet, sailing with the damned for eternity. The crew could only sail forward, but they would never escape the ghosts they had left behind. Days passed as the Maelstrom sailed out of the cursed waters of the Devil's Triangle, the oppressive mist finally behind them. Yet the weight of Declan's sacrifice hung over the crew like a dark cloud that no clear sky could lift. Cole stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the horizon for land, but his mind was elsewhere, haunted by the choices they had made. The sea was calm, but the quiet was unnerving, as though the world itself held its breath, waiting for something to break the uneasy stillness. The ghostly whispers that had once filled the air were gone, but their memory lingered like an invisible scar. The crew moved mechanically, their expressions vacant, each lost in their own thoughts. Dante, once quick to joke or curse at the slightest inconvenience, now spoke in a hollow voice, his laughter gone. Corwin spent most of his time alone, staring into the distance as if searching for the ghosts they had left behind. The sacrifice of Declan had bought their escape, but it had also claimed a piece of each of them. They had survived the Devil's Triangle, but they would never return as the men they had once been. Cole knew that they had been marked, cursed not by the Ghost Fleet itself, but by their own choices. As the ship neared land, the crew spotted the distant outline of a port on the horizon. It should have brought relief, but none of them felt it. The closer they came to shore, the more they realized they would carry this curse with them for the rest of their lives. They had left the Ghost Fleet behind, but the guilt would remain like a shadow, following them wherever they went. The ship creaked as it approached the harbour, the familiar sounds of seagulls and bustling docks growing louder. But even here, in the safe embrace of civilization, the crew could not shake the feeling that they were still being watched. That night, after they had docked and disembarked, Cole found himself alone on the deck of the Maelstrom, staring out at the dark sea. The others had gone ashore, but Cole felt no urge to leave. The sea called to him, its dark waters whispering in a language only he could understand. The Ghost Fleet was gone, but its presence still lingered in his mind, a reminder that the Triangle had taken more than just one life. It had taken something from all of them. The stars above twinkled coldly, indifferent to the struggles of mortal men. Cole knew then that they had not escaped. They had only postponed their fate. As the moon rose high in the sky, Cole heard it again, the faintest of whispers carried on the breeze from the sea. "Join us." The words sent a chill through his spine, though they were barely audible. He turned to look out at the horizon where the dark waters met the night sky, and for just a moment he thought he saw them again. The ghostly sails, the spectral figures, watching him from the shadows. The curse of the Ghost Fleet had not ended. It had only just begun. The crew may have escaped the Triangle, but the ghosts of the dead would follow them to the ends of the earth. And deep in his heart, Cole knew he was already one of them.